One of the complaints that I've had with Black Ops 6 is the fact that the servers are seemingly garbage. Packet burst is everywhere. You can see it when you're in solo games in zombies, solo games, in private matches, in multiplayer, and then of course in multiplayer games as well. The Tactical Brit put out a video. He said Black Ops 6 servers are a mess. Here is why. I don't know what reasoning he gives. I haven't watched this yet. As you can see, I have the first 30 seconds played here. But I wanted to watch this one with you guys, and let's see what his experience was and what he found out in Black Ops 6.
When I fired up Black Ops 6 multiplayer,
And of course, he's got just a wicked voice.
For the first time, I was astonished to see that the beta experience I played and the multiplayer experience I played felt like two very different things.
I would agree with that for the most part. I think the packet burst is more or less the same, but I think the desync in the final game is worse.
It felt like I was dying instantly. It felt like I was being killed around corners before I could even see somebody, and it felt like I was dying and taking damage in places I wasn't anticipating. The whole thing felt delayed and arguably desynced.
There it
and
is.
If that experience has been the same for you, you're not alone. It's been a very popular conversation point on Reddit. It's been a very popular conversation point on social media.
He's slaying, though.
And it made me decide to do a deep dive. Now, before I get into the ins and outs of this journey, all of the testing I did and how I verified my results, this entire thing took a massive amount of time and effort. So if you could drop a like on this, share
Go click
it with
the link
me,
down in the
and consider
description, hit the
subscribing as
like
we're
button
the
on
road
his
to
video.
200K. That would be greatly appreciated. Any uses of YouTube's Super Thanks feature or becoming a channel member also directly supports me in making these videos. My first call of interest was just to see if it was the sheer amount of players playing Black Ops 6 that was worsening the server experience, which is a logical
Could be.
first step. Now, Black Ops 6 does
But
have
Call of
60 Hz
Duty-
servers,
oh.
and I will go into details about
Oh,
that
yes.
later on when I show you my test results and just how many things can go wrong. But it just made sense to me to try the game at midday in the United Kingdom.
So this is something that I do think is legitimately a thing. Like when he put up on screen there that he was playing pre-peak hours. When the game first came out and was in New Zealand, and I took a trip to New Zealand, I had less lag than I do now. I had less packet burst than I do now. So this isn't
where pretty much
far-fetched.
everybody's at work and pretty much everybody's at school. And I was astonished to see that the game felt exactly like I thought it would feel. It felt like the beta, it felt snappy, it felt responsive, it didn't feel like I was dying around cover or corners. So server load definitely did come into the equation.
There it is.
And it made me want to do more digging. So that's exactly what I did, both across private matches and in public matches, to verify my results, to find out what in sweet hell was going on with Black Ops 6 and why everything felt desynced and delayed. And there's a lot of scientific testing that effectively
Science,
had to go
numbers,
into
the
this,
numbers,
because I
Mason.
had to verify that this was something happening in public games and in
Like, even
private
that
matches,
kill
which I've been
alone.
able to verify in my test results. I had to verify that this wasn't due to
So he's saying
certain
this is
character
peak
skills and
hours.
that different character models had different hitboxes that were causing problems. That isn't the case.
It's
All of
not.
the hitboxes in this game do have trouble, which you're going to see in this video. And
I don't
had
think
to
that's 'cause of the
verify pretty
hitboxes,
much
though.
that it wasn't my own connection and test various examples across various different latencies.
Okay.
So I presented Black Ops 6 with a good connection, where myself and another player had under 10 milliseconds of latency to the
That's
server.
unbelievable. I never
and
get
then
that.
tested it on a bad connection, where I had 100 milliseconds or 85 milliseconds of latency, and the other
That gun's
player
nasty,
still
by the way.
maintained their regular 3 to 10 milliseconds. The idea behind this was that I wanted to see if I could make Black Ops 6 have any problem or errors under perfect scenarios,
Okay.
and then see how those scenarios were exacerbated in a worse environment. Whilst
Fair
I
enough.
may play over Ethernet with a 3 millisecond latency to my London server,
That's-
the average gamer normally plays over Wi-Fi.
So I play like over LAN cable with like or Ethernet cable. I think I still get like 60 milliseconds of lag.
And the average gamer probably
I'm in
is
Canada,
floating
but-
more around 30 to 40, and that can change based on your region and your closeness to a server. And for those of you unfamiliar with ping and latency, it's how long it takes for information to go from the server back to your client.
It's a big deal.
Completing a full
The fact that he's on
round trip.
3 milliseconds.
So
Look
before I
at
dive
his
into these
latency's
test
up there.
results,
It's
there's a couple
3.
of things worth mentioning here. To start with, Black Ops 6 does indeed have 60 Hz servers.
Like
which
stable
means that
3.
You're sending 60 updates per second, and that includes everything. Movement, shooting, and pretty much all information in
I hope he
between
says what other
to
games
Black
have
Ops
here.
6's servers. And in theory, you should be receiving 60 updates back from Black Ops 6's servers. But what I found is that in the mornings and up until about midday,
Oh.
you do definitely get 60 updates back, but in the evening, that seems to collapse in and around to 30
So I stream every day at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I get better connections on stream than I do when I play at night. That's 100% a thing.
to 50 updates. It seems as though they're definitely having some problems with the initial load of players, and this is something that I suspect probably will improve over time as they roll out more servers, but at the moment...
Okay, so this is the comparing different games. So most is 60 hertz. Iron Sight, I don't even know that game. 60 hertz, Valorant 73, Modern Warfare 2019 69, and then we're around 50 hertz. So you're not getting as much data back as you should
I
be.
can safely say that 60 to 60 is definitely not occurring at peak hours, and that's definitely adding to the desync. For those of you unfamiliar with the concept of update
Valorant,
rates on
128
servers, it's basically how much information is shared between your game and what you're seeing on screen to the actual game server where the game is taking place.
Okay.
So the more updates you get per second, the more the information
So
is accurate.
this data, if you're not getting enough hertz, essentially you will actually take the enemy will take more bullets to kill. Like that's literally what will happen, which is insanity.
The more the hit reg feels snappy, the more the third person animations make sense, and everything just looks like it should look. So when you're not receiving updates back from the client at a fast enough rate, you get bad hit reg, you get third person animations and models looking funky, and you get these instances where you're shot around cover or shot behind cover and you get killed behind corners. So let's start with the ideal scenario, where both players in this private match, including myself, had under 10 milliseconds of latency to the dedicated private server match server. And again, I have verified these results in public matches as well.
Okay.
And it seems as though private matches are in fact, of course, using dedicated servers as they stipulate online.
They are, yeah.
And already,
That's why I'm still
there were
getting
some
packet
problems
burst on
in
that.
an ideal scenario. I'm going to show you some footage of this. We had 10 instances of a character sprinting and tactical sprinting across a door.
Yeah, that
Whilst
is
regular
wild.
sprinting, we seem to have fairly okay hit registration with no big issues, but once the character was moving at high velocity and tac sprinting,
So he's moving
on
faster
3
than
of
the fire
10
rate.
occasions, we had no hit registration at all. And I'm at a distance using an XM4 with a high rate of fire weapon, and I'm not moving my crosshair across the screen. I'm firing at a straight center point directly in front of me with a natural bit of recoil deviation. And although I'm firing in a straight line at a really high rate of fire, on more than one occasion, I got 0 registration on the character
So it
tac
wasn't
sprinting
all
across
of
the
them,
door.
but it
That is
happened.
in ideal network scenarios. So there's already a bit of error of doubt. The next point of call for me then was to check out the actual character models themselves and see if hitboxes even under perfect scenarios were an issue. And the answer is yes.
Well,
There are
here
a
and there.
number of locations on pretty much every character model I tested where shooting around the character
There's
model
another one.
resulted in them getting a hit marker when they shouldn't. There were a couple of locations.
And that's because the hitboxes are the same, but the character models aren't. And this is going to become a bigger issue the more and more skins are added to
around
the game.
hips of the opponent, around the feet, around the legs, and it seemed to vary from character model to character model, but universally, even while stationary, they were receiving damage that they shouldn't have been receiving. And that means when you factor in things like character movement and people zipping around the screen at the speed of light, there are going to be multiple hundreds, thousands, if not millions of instances of players receiving damage even though somebody missed. So even in ideal networking scenarios, we have no hit registration in some situations.
Like right under the
Again,
elbow
low
there.
percentage, but still some nonetheless. And we also have character models that are receiving hit markers when they shouldn't. And the final port of call for me on this testing was checking out desyncing third-person animations. And what I mean by this is that when you look at an enemy opponent, are they doing what you're expecting them to do
yes,
on
they
screen?
often aren't.
So what I found a lot of in Black Ops 6 is that it looks like an opponent either isn't looking at me,
Yes.
isn't aiming down sight, but suddenly I start receiving damage.
And you get nuked.
And this has been an issue in the past for Call of Duty, and specifically an issue in Warzone, where character models can be
100%.
looking the wrong way, even though in their game they were looking at you. So I thought this would be a natural place to take a look. And it does happen. It's definitely hard to trigger in ideal scenarios with under 10 milliseconds of latency, but there's still a desync and delay between what it looks like the character's doing and what they're actually doing. So there's been a number of times where I've fought an opponent and they've jump shot round a corner, And it looks like their gun is in the wrong direction, but they're still firing their gun and looking at me. So it's just completely scuffed. It feels as though all of a sudden I've got a character who I feel I have the drop on because they're not even aiming at me and not even shooting at me. But in reality, they
I
actually...
wonder how this affects something like the high alert perk or the recon perk where they're looking at you, it alerts you on screen. Like, I wonder if that doesn't sync up properly as well.
are.
I wonder if he tests
When
that.
you go into the bad network scenarios, third-person animations are an absolute mess. Even at just 70 to 80 milliseconds of latency, sometimes even as low as 50 to 40, you will get instances where character models are not looking at you or not firing at you, but on their screen, they absolutely are.
Wow.
So if you felt
that's
like
the
you
higher
died
ping.
lightning fast, it's probably because perceptually in your head, you're processing character information where somebody isn't doing anything,
But
in
on their
reality, you're receiving
screen, they
damage.
are.
And it creates a very confusing scenario where it feels
That's
like
not
you're being
good.
killed when you shouldn't be. The final thing I was using was to see whether Call of Duty was using any kind of lag compensation. And what I mean by that was it predicting where a character model was supposed to be and dealing damage when it shouldn't be? Or how
would
does
be
Call
wild.
of Duty compensate for somebody on bad latency? And this
So
bleeds
good
into my
latency versus
scenario
bad
testing,
latency.
which we'll talk about shortly. Now, generally speaking, Call of Duty, by the looks of things, under ideal scenarios and non-ideal scenarios, doesn't seem to have any kind of predictive movement system. I was wondering in my head if
think
they
that's
tried
good.
to achieve better networking and generally better hit reg by having it in such a way that there was almost a ghost outline of your character and the server guessed where your character would
That
be as
would
opposed
make
to
the
where it
game feel
actually
very
was.
bad.
That's not the case. That's not
Oh,
the
it hit him
scenario.
that time.
In this game, they do just favor the shooter. And what I mean by that is whoever is firing in the scenario, so whoever is shooting their gun at an opponent, is going to receive some degree of lag compensation where they may deal damage to an opponent, even if on that opponent's screen, they've already gone past a corner. And I'll show you this in our test results. So I did a bunch of different testing on this where I had bad connectivity and also the other person had good connectivity, and then I tried it where they had bad connectivity and I had good connectivity.
So yeah, that's what I was talking about
And
before.
generally speaking, the entire thing is a mess.
Oh,
The second
no.
you introduce a single player into a lobby who has a fluctuating latency or what you would consider to be a bad connection, so much disparity starts to happen pretty much across the board. Everything feels greatly more delayed, you feel more desync in third-person animations, hit reg becomes remarkably more
Just to throw this out there, this is something that skill-based matchmaking would make a lot worse too. Because so this whole thing where people are saying there's damage-based input, damage-based matchmaking. So basically the better you are, the more damage you have to deal with someone. It's probably more so the fact that you get into lobbies with a more specific group of people, which are going to have worse connections, and then the game is going to feel worse, like he's talking about here, and make it feel that way, which actually makes a lot of
questionable.
sense.
So let's talk about it. So the first scenario is where I'm on around about 80 latency, and the person I'm firing on is still maintaining their low ping of sub 10 milliseconds. And effectively, if you are the person with bad latency and you're the shooter, the situation does get a little worse for you in some scenarios, but it also degrades the experience for everyone. So to start with,
So
when
late.
firing in a straight line with somebody straight
my God,
across
did you
the
see the
door or
second
moving
hit
across the
marker?
door at high speed, it pretty much doubled the amount of times there was no hit registration. So we went from about 3 out of 10 scenarios
my
under good
God.
networking scenarios to about 6 out of 10 where firing at somebody entered a no reg scenario. So that's not great if you're on a slightly more fluctuating or tricky connection. And that's to be expected. That's not a uniquely Call of Duty thing. Generally speaking, if you can play over Ethernet, please do play over Ethernet. And if you're playing over Wi-Fi, please do anything you can to maximize your general latency.
Okay.
But the problem, and this is arguably the biggest issue with Call of Duty, is that it always
Look how bad
favors
that
the
looks.
shooter in terms of lag compensation. So there are times where if you're firing in a straight line and somebody moves across the door,
No hit.
you happen to hit an opponent who is somebody who is on a good connection, they're going to receive damage around the corner. So
Yeah.
I, as the shooter, will receive a delayed hit marker. They, as the receiver of the damage, will be well past the door or window that they crossed and
The two
still
hit markers
receive
on that.
damage. So this entire system favors whoever's firing, and that is not great. Many other games in the past, like Battlefield, had
Oh my
instances where they
God.
favored the shooter in networking-based
do
scenarios.
they
where
fix
ping got
that?
tricky, and then completely change that system so that people with good connections were prioritized. And Call of Duty absolutely needs to be the same.
Okay.
They need to change how lag compensation works, and they need to stop it where players are receiving damage around corners. Battlefield 1 even introduced a leading shot indicator to compensate for this issue. But the biggest thing, and one of the things that I feel created more problems, is just how much third-person animations began to desync across bad networking scenarios.
This I'm not surprised with at all.
When I had a bad connection and my opponent had a good connection, their third-person animations didn't always line up. But when I had a good connection and my opponent had a bad connection, wowzers, you would see just straight up complete mismatches where their gun is sideways and they'd be firing their weapon and you would start receiving damage. It looks like they're not even in any kind of shooting position to fire on you, and the game decides, okay, sorry, that animation isn't synced. We're all going to receive damage before we've synced that animation.
Oh yeah, you could really see it there.
So in pretty much any scenario where either the person shooting or the person receiving damage,
I'm wondering what he's
going to
say when it's bad versus bad.
Complete desync in third-person animations.
Wonder if that's going to be worse
have a
or
slightly
better.
Questionable Wi-Fi connection with somewhat fluctuating latency, both of you are going to receive some of the worst third-person syncing and animations I've probably ever seen. And if they don't network prioritize these or find a way to fix this, it's just going to cause problems for anybody. Now, generally speaking, like
that's an obvious one
most people
too.
play over Wi-Fi, most people play with fairly unstable connections at times, and in pretty much all
most people would play
scenarios,
with
even
Wi-Fi.
in multiplayer online, I have seen third-person animations where someone's shooting at me even though they haven't rounded a corner. Or someone's shooting at me when they're mid-air and it doesn't look like that they're looking at me.
Like we
These
just saw.
results verify that that is absolutely what's occurring. The last port of call for me was to test the time to kill to time to death disparity. And what I mean by this is how long it takes for you to kill an opponent visually versus how quickly it takes for you to die visually.
Okay.
Now, recording this is a little bit tricky.
I was going to say, how do you do
The way
that?
to do it is to actually count frame by frame how long it took you to kill an opponent and how long it takes you to die from an opponent using the same
gun.
weapon with the same hitboxes in the same location. So that's exactly what I did. We fired an XM4 directly into the opponent's chest with no variation in the hitbox that was achieved. And both XM4s were pretty much identical in this scenario, and we counted the amount of frames between the weapon firing and how quickly that person died. And in this scenario, both of us had 40 to 30 milliseconds of latency, which I feel is a pretty healthy medium ground.
Yeah, that's like average, I would say.
A pretty accurate depiction of what will likely happen in game. Now, in terms of killing an opponent, from firing my weapon to the opponent physically dying on the red hit marker, it took 25 video frames for that to occur.
25 frames.
But when receiving damage, it took just 19 frames from the first bullet making contact and then firing.
It feels like you die
to
faster
me
than you kill.
Which is a 27% disparity between time to kill and time to death.
So that's
So when it
huge.
feels like that you're shooting your opponent and it takes them ages to die, and it feels like you're dying really quickly, that is how the game is currently operating.
Wow.
TTK values and time to death values are two experiences that are something that has to work in sync.
No
This
kidding.
is something that every first-person shooter generally suffers with. But other games, Battlefield namely, have tried to compensate for this in the past, and I would like to see Call of Duty get that percentage as low as humanly possible and think about how they're handling their lag compensation by prioritizing.
So it's funny, this is probably one of the best Call of Duty games we've had, but like the servers are not good. Like garbage, like literally garbage.
Overarchingly, this entire scenario, both in the ideal scenarios where we have no reg instances, bad models, and general desync, and then bad scenarios where we have even more of that, just show that at the moment, at a base layer, the game is not in a pretty good spot.
Yeah.
Across the board, pretty much every single character model in this game needs to have a once-over to make sure their character.
So that's not going to happen. I'm going to tell you right now, that's not going to happen because they're going to go more and more wild with the operators and the hitboxes are not going to match. I bet you we end up getting operators where their character model is actually bigger than the hitbox, and there'll be areas where you shoot that you do not actually get a hit marker. I almost guarantee that is going to happen as well.
models are actually receiving damage where they should be receiving damage, which I think is a very clear thing. The entire networking infrastructure of this game needs to be updated to prioritize third-person animations as much as they're prioritizing information about shooting. Because the actual disparity I think most people are seeing and most people are witnessing isn't the fact that their opponent just happened to kill them first, it's the fact that they don't mentally recognize that their opponent's even aiming down sight at them. So when you factor in desyncing third-person animations with a pretty large 27% difference disparity between time to kill and time to death, you get scenarios where people feel like they're rounding a corner and dying instantly, or an opponent peeks a window and they die instantly.
Yeah.
And the more it feels like someone dies instantly, the more likely they are to quit this game.
Very true.
So folks, that's all the findings I have.
Prioritize that over skill-based matchmaking.
A very large amount of time and a lot of verifying results by not only in private matches, but also in public matches, making sure that I wasn't doing anything crazy. It also involved a lot of technical trickery because Call of Duty closes network analysis tools in an anti-cheat deterrent, which obviously makes sense. So this required me doing some stuff on my router and just generally just technical stuff to figure out how all of this works.
I'm not smart enough to do that. I'm going to say that right away.
Latency scenarios, etc., etc. All of this was done within the confines of being entirely safe and being anti-cheat compliant. Nothing dodgy was used. It was just a case of adding simulated delay to my own router, adding simulated delay to a second router, and seeing how that would affect a private and public match scenario. And universally, I can say that Call of Duty has some very easy fixes on their hands and some slightly more complex fixes on their hands.
What are the easy ones?
I feel like character models, hit registration, and desyncing third-person animations are something that they can probably resolve quite quickly.
Okay.
But in terms of their lag compensation and how they prioritize the shooter in all equations, that's something I feel they need to quickly address and not something I feel has a silver bullet answer. And probably something that's going to take many months for them to resolve.
And probably trials of trying
folks,
different things to make it feel better.
Hopefully found it useful. Hopefully explained the experiences you're experiencing. And again,
yeah, that was a really good video. That was a great explanation of what is going on. To me, the time to kill versus time to death disparity is probably what most people will notice the most, and probably what should be addressed first. And I think addressing that will address some other things and whatever they have to do to fix that. But those are some big problems. And I worry that they're not even going to touch this. That's interesting. But yeah, I will tell you right now, we are definitely going to like that video. That was a great video. And check out the Tactical Brit. He's got a beautiful voice.